questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Chilliwack-Hope.
On Wednesday, Vice Admiral Mark Norman's lawyer said, quote, "No person should walk into a courtroom fighting their elected government or any sort of political factors." Unfortunately, this is exactly what happened in the Mark Norman trial. This Prime Minister interfered in the judicial process. He withheld documents from the defense. They've denied Mark Norman access to his own emails. Why did the Prime Minister so clearly have his finger on the scales of justice in the Mark Norman case?
The Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, almost everything that the member opposite just said is not correct. And in fact, as the Director of Public Prosecutions stated yesterday, there was no contact or influence from outside the Public Prosecution Service, either in the initial decision with respect to the laying of this charge or the decision to stay the charge. And Mr. Speaker, the member opposite should know that all of the procedures conducted by the Office of the Public Prosecutor and the RCMP are totally independent of the Government of Canada.
Honourable member for Chilliwack-Hope.
Mark Norman's lawyer said, quote, "What you don't do is you don't put your finger and try to weigh in on the scales of justice. That is not what should be happening." That's right. But that's exactly what did happen in the Mark Norman trial. The Liberals actively worked against him. The Prime Minister said Norman would be charged while the investigation was ongoing. He refused to waive cabinet confidentiality. He withheld thousands of documents from Norman's defense team. How does the Prime Minister defend this blatant interference in an ongoing judicial proceeding?
The Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, it's a little offensive to hear the member opposite impugn the integrity of the RCMP and the independent conduct of their investigations, and also to impugn the integrity of the Public Prosecution Services, who has been crystal clear that at no time, Mr. Speaker, was there any contact or influence from the government, and that all decisions with respect to initiating the prosecution or staying it were made independent of the government.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack-Hope.
The Prime Minister wants Canadians to believe that because he failed when he tried to politically interfere in yet another criminal proceeding, that his failure should be celebrated as an exoneration of his bad behavior. That's like saying that someone who tries to rob a bank should get off the hook if they fail to get away with the cash. The Prime Minister withheld documents, coached government witnesses, and tried to bankrupt Mark Norman. How does this Prime Minister defend this blatant political interference in the judicial system?
Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Order. Mr. Speaker, once again, none of that is actually true. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear that all procedures conducted by the Office of the Public Prosecutor and by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are totally independent of the Government of Canada. The entire structure of their work is designed to keep it independent. Decisions that are made on the basis of proper legal considerations and the evidence, and all of those considerations are weighed carefully in court before a judge. Mr. Speaker, the matter was entirely without political influence, and that's exactly what the Director of Public Prosecutions averred yesterday.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has done his best to end the contract with Davy Shipyards. He tried to destroy the reputation of Vice Admiral Norman, who stood up to Liberal interference. He doesn't like anyone opposing him, as was the case with the former Attorney General. Another strange coincidence, when the former Parliamentary Secretary said he would testify against his own Liberal government, the charges were dropped. If that's not political interference, what is it?
Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians deserve better than innuendo. And so I would remind the member opposite, when legal matters are to be investigated, they are investigated independently by the RCMP. Any decision with respect to the laying of charges are made independently by the Director of Public Prosecutions. And as the Director of Public Prosecutions made crystal clear yesterday, there was no contact and no influence to any member of the Director of Public Prosecution Services Canada in the determination of these decisions, that there was no influence by the Government of Canada.
The Honourable Member Mr. Speaker, only the Liberals can see political interference in this case. The truth is that the Liberals didn't want this contract to go to Davie Shipyards. So what did they do? They tried to destroy the career of Vice Admiral Norman, an honest man respected by all. This Prime Minister refused to provide evidence to Vice Admiral Norman, and Norman's lawyer even said yesterday that the PMO was advising witnesses. So if this isn't political interference, what is it?
With respect to the court order to produce documents, here are the facts. The Government of Canada met all of its obligations with respect to third-party record applications. All documents from the priority individuals identified by the defence in February were in fact provided to the court. In total, Mr. Speaker, over 8,000 documents on behalf of the 7 government organizations were submitted to the court over the course of this process. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to acknowledge that on this matter, both the judge and the Crown thank departmental officials for their excellent cooperation in this process.
Honourable member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians across this country are struggling to find a place to call home. We are in the midst of a national housing crisis. I met a woman who lived in co-op housing, and she told me that living in co-op housing meant she was able to build a life. She was able to raise her 3 kids. Why can't this government understand that we need to build new homes, affordable, non-market, non-profit, and cooperative? Will this government adopt our plan to build 500,000 new affordable homes across this country?
Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to be able to answer this question because not only do we have a plan to give every Canadian a safe and affordable place to have a home, but we also have put that plan into place since 2015. We have announced in November 2017, we have announced the first ever national housing strategy, which is going to give 500,000 Canadian families a safe and affordable home in the years to come. Mr. Speaker, we know we have a lot more to come, but we're well beyond planning for the future.
Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. From Burnaby to Montreal, adequate, affordable housing should be a right, but for too many families, this is increasingly out of their reach. After 3 years of Liberal inaction, people are spending more and more to meet their basic housing needs. We have to make different choices in order to get better results. Why have the Liberals refused to adopt our plan to immediately build 500,000 affordable housing units? The Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say in French what I said in English. We, in the Liberal government, since 2015, have been working with our partners in order to address the issue of housing. Since 2017, we have a plan which will get 500,000 Canadians into affordable quality housing. We are pleased to have a plan, and we're very proud to go forward with it. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. The Mark Norman affair has been a disaster since the very beginning, and once again there are serious allegations of interference on the part of the Prime Minister's office. The NDP asked the Director of Public Prosecutions to exercise her right, appoint an independent attorney or prosecutor to investigate these allegations. We have to restore people's trust. Will Liberals let us learn the truth?
Mr. Speaker, I quite frankly find it offensive when a member in this House rises and impugns the integrity and reputation of the RCMP and the Director of Public Prosecutions by suggesting that they would ever conduct their business in any way which was less than independent. And if the member opposite perhaps did not hear, but the Director of Public Prosecutions yesterday repeated that there has been no contact or influence from outside the PPSC, either in the initial decision to prosecute or in the subsequent decision to stay the charge.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The Liberals are clearly avoiding the question. Yesterday we learned crucial information wasn't just hidden from Vice Admiral Norman's lawyers, it was even hidden from the prosecution. His lawyer said that the Privy Council and the Prime Minister's office withheld information, but she didn't know why. The only people that can answer why are sitting on the Liberal benches. Why did the Liberals hide vital information from the prosecution, the defense, and from the rest of Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, here are the facts. The government met all of its obligations with respect to third-party record applications. And as I've said, all documents from priority individuals identified by the defense in February were in fact provided to the court. Mr. Speaker, over 8,000 documents on behalf of 7 government organizations were submitted to the court over the course of this process. The government met its obligations, and the public prosecutor has indicated that there was no inappropriate contact or influence on her decision-making.
Honourable Member for Durham.
Let's talk about political influence, Mr. Speaker. In the first Liberal cabinet meeting, Scott Bryson interfered with a naval shipbuilding contract, and that action leaked out. The Prime Minister had the leak investigated, and the Privy Council office identified 73 people that were aware of the leak. So my question is simple. How many of the 73 names did the Prime Minister or the PCO give to the RCMP to investigate?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is a lawyer and shares the same profession as me. He should know that when you investigate a charge, that's done by law enforcement, in this case the RCMP. He should also know that when you lay a charge, that's done by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, an entity that his party created while in power. Thirdly, he should know that when a decision is made to withdraw a charge or stay it, that is also done by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. All of those entities and all of those steps were taken independently, as they should be in this country.
The Honourable Member for Durham. Order.
Speaker, as that member should know, the Prime Minister asked for an investigation of the leak. 73 names were found to have known about the leak, but only one name was handed to the RCMP, Admiral Mark Norman. Without that investigation, Mr. Speaker, he would not have been relieved of command. Without that direction from the Prime Minister's office, he would not have lost his job, his reputation, and spent 2 years fighting for the vindication he had yesterday. Will that member stand in this House and apologize to Admiral Mark Norman?
Order. Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, in different contexts, I have a lot of respect for the member opposite, for the advocacy he does for the men and women in uniform in this country. But what I think is important to underscore is that there are men and women in uniform, namely the RCMP, that took charge of the very investigation that he's impugning. Exactly. And he's impugning the law enforcement officials and the independence of their work. And what I would put to him is that what he should also listen to is not just from our side of this aisle, but he should also listen to the defense counsel for Admiral Norman, who said, and I quote, "The decision to stay this prosecution was exercised by prosecutors and the DPP unimpacted by any political considerations, as it should be."
Order. Alors, l'honorable.
The Honourable. Order. The Honourable Member. Calm down. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. One thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that former Minister Scott Bryson resigned because he didn't want to have to answer questions about the termination of the contract with Davy Shipyards for the Asterisk. The Prime Minister is complicit in having done all he could to prevent the disclosure of documents. If he really wanted the truth, he would have allowed the defense to have these documents. Does he still claim there was no political interference? Mr. Speaker, again, in French, there are 3 important things. First of all, the decision to launch an investigation on the part of the RCMP. Second, the PSPC decided to go forward. And third, it was the Director of Public Prosecutions who decided that the charges would be dropped. Here, the Director herself said,
nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political...
L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, is it true that the Prime Minister and the Privy Council took the decision to terminate the contract for the Astérix, jeopardizing all kinds of jobs in the Quebec region? Now, there were thousands of documents that had been requested by Norman's defense. Some were made public, but they were redacted. They didn't want certain witnesses interrogated, and the Prime Minister himself asked the RCMP to investigate. Why are they trying to convince Canadians that there was no political interference? The Parliamentary Secretary. Now, the Director herself said this with respect to the investigation and the legal process. She said that all obligations had been fulfilled, all documents were provided the court, more than 8,000 documents in all. And Mr. Speaker, with respect to the file and the documents, the judge thanked the departments and officials for their cooperation.
Richmond Hill.
Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doesn't like it when people of honor stand up to him. He tried to interfere in a shipbuilding contract, but Admiral Norman protected the Navy and the delivery of the ship it needed. When the Prime Minister didn't get his way, he began a politically motivated campaign against Admiral Norman. He instructed the RCMP to investigate and told the public Norman would be charged and end up at trial. When will the Prime Minister realize that he can't use the power of his office to attack those he views as his enemies?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the member's opposite service to this country, as we all respect Vice Admiral Norman's. But what I can underscore for her, and perhaps elaborate for her, is how the legal process works. The legal process conducts itself in an independent manner. When requests for documents are made, we identify the documents, redactions, and what is covered by cabinet confidences. Those decisions are made independent of political actors, as they should be. Furthermore, we don't intervene in that judicial process because we safeguard the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. That's the way the system is supposed to work, and that is something that I would hope all members of this House would appreciate and protect.
Here, here.
Order, order. The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
But, Mr. Speaker, those independent organizations can only make informed decisions if they have the documents to read them. The Prime Minister thinks he's above the law, and it's time to restore Canadians' confidence in the highest office in the land. We know that he politically interfered by refusing to turn over critical documents to Mark Norman's lawyers. He interfered by refusing to waive cabinet confidence, and he interfered by counseling key witnesses on what to say. Everyone knows this is political interference. When will the Prime Minister admit it?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, let's hear what the actual director had to say. Quote, no other factors were considered in this decision, nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political influence in either the initial decision to prosecute Mr. Norman or in the decision to stay the charge today. The reason why the Minister of Border Safety was so appalled by this line of questioning is because you don't impugn the integrity of people who are leading the judicial system or are independent officials, and secondly, you don't impugn the integrity of people who don't have a chance to stand up in this House and defend themselves. I'll do it for them. The Director of Public Prosecutions operated independently at all times.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Order. Mr. Speaker, whether it's Mark Norman's reputation or workers at Davie shipyards, the consequences of this Prime Minister's behaviour are significant. The Liberals have shown they have no respect for the rule of law. First, allegations of interference with witnesses and these hidden documents. People have the right to know the truth. Will the government launch a true a truly independent investigation to get to the bottom of this matter, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. What I want to underscore is that the investigation was conducted by the RCMP, approved by the director herself. The charges were dropped by the director. Now, what the lawyer for Mr. Norman said,
by prosecutors and the DPP, unimpacted by any political considerations, as it should be. She further underscored that is in fact how things are supposed to work. I agree with her assessment.
Bravo.
Honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Nobody on this side is impugning the motives of the RCMP or the Director of Public Prosecutions. What we're impugning is the motives of a government who interfered in this case when the Prime Minister said before charges were laid that it was going to go to court, who hired the reporter that reported on Scott Bryson's pork barreling, and then who's been accused of having told witnesses what to say, Mr. Speaker. So that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And instead of trying to defend the Director of Public Prosecutions with their discredited word, they should launch an independent investigation to show that nothing happened. So what are we going to have?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I actually think it's quite unfortunate that it's come to this, because what it's come to is that in the last 4 months, we've had on 2 occasions the Director of Public Prosecutions feeling incumbent upon herself to issue public statements about non-interference. We know the first one was in February, when she talked about comments that related to a different matter that was being elaborated upon in this House. The second time is yesterday, and the fact that she's being compelled upon to issue these kinds of statements, declaring in the loudest voice possible that no influence occurred, is actually a function of the fact of the type of questioning that we're facing in this House. I think it's a sad state of affairs because the independence is important.
the Honourable Member for Bellechasse, order. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, when Vice Admiral Mark Norman stood up for the Navy against Scott Bryson's political interference, the PM attacked him, even before any charges were laid. The Liberals have not hesitated to drag the Vice Admiral's name in the mud, even though he's had an impeccable career. They've also endangered hundreds of jobs at Davy shipyards. Now, Davy did deliver the Astérix on time and on budget. When will the Prime Minister present an apology to Norman and restore him as head of the Canadian Navy? Mr. Speaker, the government took no decision in staying the charges. It was not aware of the decision taken by the Director of Public Prosecutions in this case. And it's actually, the Director of Public Prosecutions even said yesterday that there was no contact or influence whatsoever with respect to the Public Prosecution Services. The Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker, when Admiral Norman stood up for the Navy against Scott Bryson's political interference, what he was doing was making priorities. He was giving priority to friends of the Liberal Party. We know that Norman made the right decision in the interest of our nation. When will the Prime Minister apologize?
Mr. Speaker, as the Public Prosecution Service of Canada confirmed, every decision was made completely independently. Based on this decision, the Deputy Minister has revised the policy in place regarding Vice Admiral Norman's original request to have the legal fees paid for as this relates. I've agreed with this advice, Mr. Speaker, and have authorized it. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister himself said that Mark Norman would end up in court even before charges were laid. Clearly, this was a political attack on someone who is standing up for what is right. It is another example of the Prime Minister attacking someone who got in his way. When will the Prime Minister apologize and have Vice Admiral Norman reinstated as Vice Chief of Defence Staff?
Minister of National Defense.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate again from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that every decision made was made independently, Mr. Speaker. I want to quote from the statement that was released. No other factors were considered in this decision, nor was there any contact or influence from outside the PPSC, including political influence in either initial decision to prosecute Mr. Norman or in the decision to stay the charge, Mr. Speaker. And General Vance, the Chief of Defense Staff, will be meeting with Admiral Norman, and then we'll be talking with the next steps. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
But that's not what Canadians see in the aftermath of the Vice Admiral Norman travesty, Mr. Speaker. What they see is a pattern of corruption with the Prime Minister, the PMO, and this Liberal government who attack and try to discredit anyone who stands up for truth, who stands up for what is right, and who gets in their way. What is this government really so desperately trying to hide? Will the Prime Minister apologize to Vice Admiral Norman and reinstate him as the head of the Navy and second in command of our armed forces?
Hear, 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 hear. Minister of National Defense.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated, no other factors were considered in this case, and no influence was created, Mr. Speaker. General Vance will be speaking with Admiral Norman at the appropriate time. Discussion will be had, Mr. Speaker, as to the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, HIV patients in Saskatchewan are not receiving treatment with free, readily available antiretroviral drugs that will save their lives and prevent transmission of the virus. This is in direct violation of the Canada Health Act. Meanwhile, young people with HIV are dying frequently in my province, and Saskatchewan has the highest HIV diagnosis rate in the country. Why won't the Liberal government enforce the Canada Health Act and ensure that HIV patients in Saskatchewan have the same access to treatment and care as other Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is deeply committed to addressing HIV and AIDS. We're investing $87 million annually to tackle HIV and other sexually transmitted and blood-borne illnesses. If there is an issue in the province of Saskatchewan, as the member has indicated, I would be happy to have her come forward and speak to me, and I will take it forward to Health Canada.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, in Trois-Rivières, important business stakeholders are getting involved in a promising airport project. The city has just invested in the construction of a new terminal, and the expectation is that the federal government will do its part. At the same time, though, in the most recent budget, the Liberal government quietly slipped in security services privatization in Canadian airports. Mr. Speaker, what can the people and business community of Trois-Rivières expect this privatization to do to the designation of their airport?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure Canadians that we are putting forward measures to improve the air passenger experience. We have provided funding to address increasing passenger volumes at our airports and to decrease passenger wait times. Our government is committed to maintaining the highest levels of security for the traveling public while improving the passenger experience, and any decision that's made on CATSA privatization will take those into account.
Honourable Member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian businesses and consumers know how important the U.S. market is for the Canadian economy. That is why it was so important to negotiate a good new NAFTA deal. But the Conservatives have repeatedly changed their tune about NAFTA. During the negotiations, they urged us to capitulate to U.S. demands to reduce our access. Then they criticized the good deal that we got, and now they're reversing themselves again. Can the minister tell this House why the new NAFTA is such a significant achievement? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Order.
Ottawa West Nepean is absolutely correct. Our government stood firm for a good deal, and we got a good deal. We did this despite the Conservatives and the Leader of the Opposition advocating for capitulation and to accept any deal at any cost. Yesterday, after months of criticizing the new NAFTA, the opposition leader promised to ratify it. He admits it's a good deal. He's clearly on board with our leadership. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan to Milkameen Nicolet.
Mr. Speaker, there is a crisis of affordability in this country, and it is the fault of the government. Canadians are being crushed by high fuel prices because of the carbon tax and the Liberals' hostility to pipelines. We put forward a common sense motion this week that would help people afford to get to work and to school. This government voted against it. Absolutely shameful. When will these Liberals admit their carbon tax is nothing but a cash grab and stand with Canadians for a change?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Party opposite voted for. They voted for the Paris Agreement and for standing up and taking action on climate change. But what are they doing now? They're lying to Canadians. They are not saying to Canadians that...
Honourable Minister of Environment. Order. 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 The member for Foothills will come to order. Order. The Honourable Minister of Environment should know that the word she used is unparliamentary. I'd ask her to apologize for that word.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize for that. The party opposite is misleading Canadians. Instead of actually talking about the costs of climate change to Canadians, which has gone from $400 million to over $2 billion per year that everyone is paying right now, instead of talking about the money back that Canadians are getting, a family of 4 in Ontario getting a climate action incentive rebate of $307, they're misleading them because they don't want to take serious climate action. They don't believe that climate change is a problem. They want to do...
The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, gas prices in British Columbia are sky high, and residents in my riding don't have the option of walking across the border with jerry cans, which is what is currently happening. Yesterday, the Liberals doubled down and voted against eliminating the carbon tax and keeping the gas pumps at the prices high. Now that they've rejected our plan, what is their plan to make gas prices more affordable for Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, let's be very clear. We have not put a price in pollution in BC because BC has stepped up. Their price has gone up by 1 cent because of their carbon price. But you know what? The party opposite doesn't seem to understand that everyone is paying the cost of climate change. In Ottawa, in the National Capital Region, we have seen massive flooding that is impacting on people's lives, just impacting on people's property, and it's just going to get worse because we have our climate change report that says Canada is warming at twice the global average. We need to take action on climate change. Why won't the party opposite join us?
Order. The honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely clear that they have no plan to make gas more affordable. The Prime Minister himself said that carbon tax being high is what he wanted to change behaviours. Well, changing behaviours of cancer is not acceptable. There is many, many impacts that they don't seem to understand for everyday Canadians. We have a plan to make life more affordable, eliminating the carbon tax and getting the Trans Mountain built. Why won't they just admit they don't care about the price of gas in British Columbia?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, why does the party opposite care about climate change? Climate change is real. It's having an impact. In British Columbia, there were forest fires that were burning stronger and longer than ever before. There were mothers that were talking to me about being worried about their kids going outside because the air quality index was 10 or dangerous. There are people that are being hit in the tourism industry because people are worried about the forest fires and the impacts. We need to take action on climate change. There is a real cost, and the environment and the economy do go together in the 21st century, so the party opposite would understand that.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
But these Liberals don't have an environment plan, they only have a tax plan. That's because this millionaire Prime Minister has never had to worry about money, and it shows. The Liberals' carbon tax increased the price of everything. Their new fuel standard will further hike the cost of gas and diesel, and their cancellation of Northern Gateway and delays on the Trans Mountain expansion have helped drive prices to all-time highs in BC. The Prime Minister actually says making everything more expensive for everyone is, quote, exactly what we want. Well, the Liberals do, but Canadians don't. So how could they actually vote against the Conservative motion to stop increasing the price of gas?
Shut up, Honourable Minister of Environment.
About what we've done to make life more affordable. We've increased taxes on the 1% so we could reduce them on the middle class. We brought in the Canada Child Benefit.
Order. Order. It is notable that members would like to have the rules applied strictly, but only against the other side. And that applies to both sides. That applies to both sides. Order. Order. The Honourable Minister of Environment has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about how we've made life more affordable for Canadians. That we have reduced taxes on the middle class. We brought in the Canada Child Benefit, which has raised 300,000 children out of poverty. And yes, we're making it no longer free to pollute, but we're giving the money back to Canadians such that a family of four in Ontario will receive $307, which is more than a family, most families will pay. We need to take action on climate change. We need to grow our economy. We need to do it in an affordable way. That's what we're doing.
Honourable Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, the CRA claims that the majority of mental impairments are temporary, including autism, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. In fact, these are lifelong conditions. They are severe and prolonged. Yet the CRA still expects these individuals to reapply for the disability tax credit. Rather than gouging vulnerable people and their families, will this minister just commit to correcting this unconscionable policy immediately?
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Living with a disability can have an important impact on the daily lives of those people who are affected and of their close ones. That's why we implemented measures to make the disability tax credit more accessible, including by simplifying the form and allowing nurses to help them with their forms. There has been an advisory group, but this group actually had been abolished in the Conservative government in 2006. But we want these people to have a voice, and we are looking forward to the committee's recommendations.
Experts are calling out the Liberals' failure to address the housing crisis and their attempts to mislead Canadians. They revealed that the percentage of federal spending on housing is at an historic low, that funding for social housing remains stagnant, and they've exposed how the Liberals inflate their numbers by treating existing programs as new ones, counting hypothetical money, and representing provincial spending as their own. They say the Liberals are not serious about housing and are taking baby steps. Why is this government deceiving Canadians and refusing to act on affordable housing?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to answer this question. We believe that every Canadian should have a safe and affordable place to call home, and that's why since 2015 we have invested $7.5 billion additional dollars helping 1 million families. That's why in November 2017 we announced the first ever national housing strategy, a $40 billion, sorry Mr. Speaker, it's a $55 billion strategy because of April 2019's budget. And that is going to lift 500,000 Canadian families out of housing conditions that are not acceptable in 2019. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, CTV News reported that this Liberal government is cutting a program that employs dozens with developmental disabilities. These workers are finding great meaning in their work at Library and Archives Canada. Our leader has pledged to restore the funding for this program. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and reverse this cold-hearted cut?
Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is taking unprecedented action to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in our economy, including inclusive work opportunities. With respect to this program, we have been working for a year with this organization. We have extended their contract. We're making sure that they have meaningful work so they can contribute to our government's operations. We are not in the business of paying people $1 an hour to do work, Mr. Speaker, as the Conservatives work. That's right.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member.
Alors.
Order.
Honourable député.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, on the face of it, the story makes no sense. 34 Canadians with a disability working at library and archives, and it costs very little, and the Liberal government cuts the program. But they're not just cutting money, they're cutting their pride and dignity. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister stand up and apologize, or are we going to have to wait for 6 months for us to deal with the situation? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. As I said in English, Mr. Speaker, we are not cutting these people off. We are looking for good jobs for these exceptional people with extraordinary capacity. We're just not going to pay them $1 a day. Under this government, we want to pay them fairly and reasonably. And the point is that we're working with this organization. We have been for 1 year, and we will find them excellent employment.
Member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, they aren't paid $1 a day. They are paid at the Ontario minimum wage level. And Canada's disability community says their motto is nothing about us without us. But this Prime Minister is moving on without them, cutting 34 jobs for disabled Canadians. The disabled community is already concerned by the Liberals' refusal to strengthen the Toothless Accessibility Canada Act. When at committee the Minister was asked about these job cuts, she said these people are no longer operationally required. The Conservative government will save these jobs. Will the Liberals follow our lead and reverse these heartless job cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Accessibility.
Perhaps I'll set the record straight, Mr. Speaker. It was our government who actually committed, increased the contract, and paid these individuals up to minimum wage. It was their government who paid them $1.50 a day. It was only under the leadership of our government that they were being paid the wage they deserve. We are working tirelessly with this organization to find them work. I did not, Mr. Speaker, say these individuals weren't operationally required. I said that the work they were doing is no longer necessary. And so that's a very important distinction, because I have absolute respect for these workers and their families, and we are doing right by them, I can assure all Canadians.
Alors.
Order.
Alors. Order. Order. L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Vimy. Mr. Speaker, today demonstrators are on the Hill. Conservative MPs have joined them by trying to control decisions of women over their bodies.
I believe safe access to abortion services is a right, because they said so in this House last year. In the face of these threats to women's health, can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health tell this House where our government stands on a women's right to choose?
Right to choose. Right to choose.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women and women alone should be the ones making decision over their own bodies. To abortion at home and abroad, from supporting groups like Planned Parenthood to increase access to Plan B and Meso. It should concern all Canadians that the Leader of the Opposition only won the Conservative leadership thanks to the same anti-choice activists protesting today. Unlike the Conservative...
Order. The Honourable Member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's agriculture and agri-food industry contributes over $110 billion annually to the Canadian economy. Yet this Liberal government seems perfectly content to let countries such as India, Saudi Arabia, Peru, Vietnam, and now China get away with taking unwarranted trade actions against this vital sector of our economy. Canola farmers are the most recent victims of this Liberal government's bungling with our global partners. When will the Prime Minister resolve the canola issue with China?
Hear, 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 hear. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade Diversification.
Mr. Speaker, last week was a good week for Canadian canola farmers. The federal government, working with provincial governments and stakeholders and farmers, we announced a support package for farmers while recommitting our effort to resolve the trade dispute with China. We continue to call on China to resolve this issue on a scientific-based evidence. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of International Trade Diversification is leading delegations around the world to promote the best quality in the world.